Today, as you're working on your assignment, which is lesson 3-4, I'm going to put up the answers from last night's homework. Please make sure you correct and check with the people by you in case you have any questions. With having a sub today for this, you may need to pause it so that you can look at the answers. Through number 12 down here, looking at the solution first written, and then looking at how to graph it. Today we're going to look at lesson 8, and in lesson 8 we're solving multi-step inequalities. So when you're solving multi-step inequalities, one of the key things is, if any of you watched the video that I had last night, is that we follow the same rules as solving them, but there's one exception. And the key thing is that when you multiply or divide by a negative number, it doesn't matter if you're multiplying, it doesn't matter if you divide. Anytime you're multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you must switch the inequality. And if you saw in last night's video, which was one I did from years past, it is key that you switch that inequality symbol around. In that, if you are going from a less than and you have negative 2x is less than 4, x must be greater than negative 2 because you're dividing both sides by negative 2. And so what switches that you are looking at is that this went from a less to a greater. That's the inequality. If it starts with a less or equal, then it's going to change to a greater or equal. So again, if you would have something like x divided by 3 is less or equal to negative 4, then we have negative 3. We're going to multiply both sides by negative 3. We still get positive 12, but now instead of less or equal, we read it as x is greater or equal. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that when you write these, you always want to have the variable, then your inequality, then you want to have the number. That will help you to graph it correctly. So what about solving some problems like this? So I would like you right now to pause the video, and we're going to solve these. I'll do the first one here. We're going to add 7 to both sides. Addition property of inequality. Negative 6a is less or equal to 24. We're dividing both sides by negative 6. Because we're dividing by negative switch, this has to change from less or equal to greater. It is negative 4 and a. From tonight's homework, if we would have been graphing that, negative 4, here is 0, here's negative 8. If it is greater or equal to negative 4, that means it includes negative 4 and everything above it as long as you can go. Like I said, I'm going to have you pause the video and then I'll put this back up so that you can see the solution of these last two. And if you need to pause the video or go back, you should have solved by subtracting 5 dividing by negative 3. Because you were doing that, that was the reason we had to now switch this from less than, because it was a greater on this side, to a less. But we want to rewrite it so that we have your variable first. So keeping in mind variable first, inequality number. What is the easiest number to check? Well, if we're looking at n being less than 3, and if you read it this way, some people say 3 is greater than n, and that really doesn't make sense. Our numbers for a solution are all numbers less than 3. Which means it's an open circle. It doesn't include 3, but everything less than it. The easiest number to check, 0. Go back to your original equation. Does it make sense if we would put 0 into that equation? And if I do that, negative 4 is less than 5 minus 3 times 0 is 0. Is negative 4 less than 5? Always. So it checks, and 0 is a solution, so we probably did it the right way. Again, if we looked at this problem, We solve it. Notice that the variable was last, so we want to rewrite it after we subtracted 30 divided by 0.8. We divided by a positive number. We are not switching. The other two we divided by a negative. We had to switch. X is less than 25. That means all our solutions are all numbers less than 25. Well, if it's all numbers less than 25, it definitely includes 0. And so if we put in 0 here, is it true? If we're checking with x equals 0. So as we take a look at that, if we check with x equals 0, and we go back to our original equation, is 50 greater than 0.8 times 0, which is just going to be 0, plus 30. Is 50 greater than 30? Always. Okay? Now, being careful on the next page as you have distributive property and they get a little more complicated. Some of you might like to rewrite this. At this point, I'm going to keep it the same. I'm going to keep the 15, keep your greater or equal. It's 5, and being careful here, we're really distributing the negative 2. So that we should have negative 8m minus 14. If you want to go plus a negative 14, you could. We're going to add our like terms on the same side of the inequality. So 15 is still going to be less or equal to. We are going to have a negative 9 minus 8m. And again, some of you might want to rewrite this as plus a negative 8. We're going to now add 9 to both sides because we want to get the m by itself. So we have 24 is less or equal to negative 8m. Most of you think to solve, we're dividing by negative 8, and this is where we have to be careful as we do our homework tonight. And we're going to have negative 3 is less or equal to m. Again, we don't want to have our answer written that way. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But to say that m, and if we notice, what did I miss? Got to go back and change that. It was less or equal. Now we have to have it open towards the side. It was open towards the m. It switches. So m is less or equal to negative 3. That means 0 should check if we plug it in. Or if we are looking at this, 0 would not check if we are writing that in. So if we think of all the solutions we want to pick, and in this case, 0 would not be our answer. Okay? As you are looking at that one, we should have another solution. So what's an easy number? Maybe negative 2, plug in, or negative 10, negative 20. And you should see that it is all the numbers that are less than negative 3. If we look at this next one, again, we want to get all the variables b on one side. If you have variables on both sides, always move the smaller. So in this case, our smaller one is the negative 2b. We're going to add 2b to both sides. We get 5b plus 12 is greater than 27. We're going to subtract 12 from both sides. 5b is greater than 15, and when we divide by 5, b is greater than 3. If b is greater than 3, remember we were just dividing by a positive number, so our solution should be, if we were graphing it, at 3, not including 3, but everything greater than 3. Which means if I wanted to do a check again, I might put in 10. If b was equal to 10, it should be true. So 3 times 10 gives me 30 plus 12. Will that be greater than 27 minus 20? Well, in this case, 42 is always going to be greater than 7. We also will have the possibility of when it's always true. And the key thing is you must get all the variables on one side this time. You can't stop at this point where you have 10 minus 8a and 10 minus 8a. You want to get it. So in this case, is 10 greater or equal to 10? Yes, because of the equal. If it would have said, is 10 greater than 10, then it would have been false, and we would have no solution. Okay? So you need to be really careful. Okay? This next one down, as you take a look at this, it says, what are the solutions? You get 6m minus 5 and 6m plus 7. We subtract 6m from both sides, and we get negative 5 is greater than negative 7. Since this will never happen, it is no solution. Kind of like when I talked about here. So just make sure you solve the problems all the way. And in this case, we would think of subtracting 5n from both sides. if we are doing that, 9 is less or equal to negative 1. Well, 9 is never going to be less or equal to negative 1. So our answer is no solution. In this case, we have 8 plus 6x is greater or equal, adding our like terms, 6x plus 2. We subtract 6x from both sides, and 8 is greater or equal to 2. That is true. That will always happen. So what is our answer? Our answer is all real numbers. So x is equal to, all real numbers will work. What about writing our inequalities? Well, in a situation like this, we have a rectangular banner that is 18 feet long, and you want no more than 48 feet trim around it. So let's think about what we're trying to do. We're actually doing the perimeter. So here's our banner. And it says the banner is 18 feet long. So we have that this is 18 feet, and on our other side we have 18 feet. What we don't know is the width. And we know it has to be no more than 48, which could it be 48? Yes. But we really want to be thinking that it's less or equal to 48. The other thing we're looking at it is we have two widths, so how do we find perimeter? 2w plus 2 times 18. This is the inequality that we're going to solve. So we're going to multiply 2 times 18 or give us a 36. Someone said, can I subtract 36 from both sides? Yes. 2w is less or equal to, when we are subtracting, we should have 12. We're dividing by a positive 2. So our width has to be less or equal to 6, and in this case, we would say feet. So if w is less or equal to 6, how do we write that out? We will say any width less or equal to 6 feet. But key thing, it must be what? Greater than, and in this case, I hear some of you saying it, 0. Has to be greater than 0, okay? Can't be less. As you look at your homework, the problems that you're doing, they're multi-step questions that you're working on. You're doing the odds, so please make sure you check the answers in the back of the book. You do question 47 and 48. 47 is kind of looking at that one. Think back to our literal equations in 48, and then 51. So as you are looking at these, kind of as you do your problems, again, I added in, I must have had the 30, this also, so just making sure you're looking at those. And depending on the time left in class, if you do have time, I'd have you give the quiz if there's at least 15 minutes left, and if not, I will give this quiz next week. So the quiz that you are giving is coming up, so you can either stop or pause the video at this point. And we are asked to solve it. It was like today's beginning homework and graph. So I will be looking for your solution first and then a graph, exactly like you did at the beginning of class.